Before we begin, I invite you to take a deep breath. Inhale gently and exhale slowly. Let the weight of the day melt off your shoulders. Wherever you are right now, lying in bed, resting in a quiet room, or simply searching for a moment of peace, know that you are safe. This is your time. A time to soften, to let go. Tonight, I will be your companion through 10 gentle tales, timeless Zen stories passed down through generations. They are not just stories. They are whispers of old wisdom, subtle enough to enter your heart without force, patient enough to wait until you are ready to receive. These are not lessons to memorize, nor puzzles to solve. There is no pressure here. Each story is a window into something deeper, a way of seeing, of feeling, of being. Some may sound simple, others strange, but all carry a quiet truth, a kind of truth that doesn't shout, but waits, like still water under the moonlight. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to stay awake. Let the words wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let them drift in and out like waves gently rocking you into sleep. These stories will guide you through the gentle landscapes of human experience, through joy and sorrow, wisdom and folly, letting go and coming home. And after each story, we will sit together for a moment, reflecting, not judging. I'll offer you a simple practice, a small way to carry the story into your day tomorrow, if you wish. So much of life pulls us outward, into schedules, into noise, into urgency. But here in this space, we go inward. This podcast is not about becoming anyone. It's about remembering who you already are when the mind is still. Let us begin this journey not with effort, but with softness. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel your body becoming heavier, like a stone gently resting at the bottom of a quiet stream. No need to resist the thoughts that come and go. Let them pass like clouds across a wide sky. Tonight we return to stillness through story. Tonight we listen not just with our ears, but with the quietest part of our being. Welcome to Buddha's quiet path. If this podcast brings you peace, don't forget to follow or share it with someone who might need stillness tonight. Let the first story begin. Story 1. A handful of salt. There once was a young man who struggled with everything. Anger visited him like an old friend. Sadness clung to him like a damp coat. Every small discomfort, a harsh word, a moment of embarrassment, even waiting in line, seemed to sting deeper than it should. He lived with a weight in his chest that he couldn't name. One day, seeking relief, he went to an old Zen master who lived by a quiet lake at the edge of the village. The young man poured out his heart. "Why do I suffer so much from things that others seem to brush off?" he asked. "Why does it feel like my pain is bigger than me?" The master listened silently, then rose. He asked the young man to fetch a handful of salt. The young man returned, confused but obedient. Without a word, the master took the salt and dropped it into a glass of water. "Drink," he said. The young man did, and immediately spat it out. "It's bitter," he coughed. The master nodded. Then he took another handful of salt and walked with the young man to the lake. He threw the salt into the water and said, "Now drink from the lake." The young man hesitated, then cupped his hands and took a sip. It was clear, refreshing. "Do you taste the salt?" the master asked. "No," the young man replied. "You see," the master said gently, "the pain is like salt. It is the same in amount, but whether it makes your life bitter depends on the container you put it in. If all you have is a glass, your suffering will taste sharp. But if you make your heart like a lake, wide and open, the same pain will dissolve into something far greater. You will still feel it, but it won't overwhelm you." The young man stood still, listening not just to the words, but to the silence between them. The breeze stirred the surface of the lake. A bird called out across the water. And in that moment, something inside him softened, not because the pain disappeared, but because he saw it differently. From then on, he remembered the lake. When sorrow came, he made space. When anger rose, he breathed deep and let it settle into something wider than himself. He became a lake, and in doing so, he began to heal. There are moments in life when suffering feels too much. A comment, a look, a small rejection. It strikes deeper than it should. You wonder why others move on easily while you carry the weight for days. But suffering, like the salt, is not always about the quantity. It's about the space we hold it in. A narrow mind, a closed heart, a rigid ego. These are like the small glass. They hold pain tightly. And so it dominates our taste, our thoughts, our reactions. But when we breathe, when we pause, when we choose not to react immediately, we expand that space. We become more like the lake. Becoming the lake doesn't mean avoiding pain or pretending it doesn't hurt. It means allowing space around it, enough so that it can lose its sharpness. It means remembering that we are not just the pain we carry. We are also the stillness beneath it. The world will not always be kind. People may speak harshly, accidents may happen, and life will bring unexpected bitterness. But how we hold those moments, that is our freedom. You don't need to change the salt. You just need to remember that your spirit, when open, is vast. That your heart can become a place where pain softens, not poisons. The young man's healing began not when the world became easier, but when his inner space grew larger than his wounds. Today, when something small irritates or saddens you, pause for just a moment, breathe in gently, and imagine your heart as a wide, still lake. Say silently to yourself, "This is just a handful of salt." Then let the emotion settle, not by resisting it, but by giving it space. With practice, you may find the bitterness fades, not because it vanished, but because you became larger than it. Story 2. 3 Questions of the King. There was once a king who ruled over a prosperous kingdom, yet his heart was not at ease. Despite his wealth, his army, his wise advisors, he found himself troubled by 3 persistent questions. The first was, what is the most important time? The second, who is the most important person? And the third, what is the right thing to do? Though many scholars came to offer their answers, none satisfied the king. Some said the most important time was the moment of planning. Others argued it was war or peace. For the most important person, Some named the king's heir, others said the high priest, or even the general. And for the right thing to do, the answers varied endlessly. Frustrated, the king dressed as a commoner and traveled into the forest to seek out a reclusive hermit, known for his deep wisdom. The hermit lived simply, tending his small garden and caring for animals. When the king arrived, the old man did not greet him with titles, nor did he stop his work. The king asked his 3 questions, but the hermit continued digging the earth, slowly and with effort. Seeing the hermit's age and weariness, the king offered to help. For hours, the two worked together silently under the sun. Just as the king was about to repeat his questions, a man burst from the trees, bleeding from a wound in his stomach. The king and the hermit rushed to his side, cleaned his wound, and stayed up all night tending him. In the morning, the man opened his eyes and whispered, "Forgive me." The king was confused. The man explained that he had been his enemy. He'd planned to ambush the king in the forest, but the king's kindness had saved his life. He pledged loyalty, tears streaming down his face. Later, when the man had recovered, the king turned again to the hermit. "Please," he said, "I still need the answers to my questions." The hermit smiled softly. "You already have them," he said. "The most important time is now. It is the only time we ever have power to act. The most important person is the one you are with. For in that moment, they are your world. And the right thing to do is to care. For that is the seed of peace." The king said nothing. He simply bowed. He had come in search of grand answers, but had found truth in humility, in service, in presence. He returned to his kingdom not with proclamations, but with a changed heart. So often we search for answers in complexity. We seek them in books, in titles, in strategy, in control. But the deepest truths are breathtakingly simple. The most important time is now. Not tomorrow's meeting, not last week's regret. The only moment we can truly live in, speak from, and act within is this one. And yet we spend so much of our lives missing it. The most important person is the one right in front of us, the stranger we rush past, the friend we half listen to, the child tugging our sleeve. We often wait for a special person to appear, but we forget the sacredness of presence. And the right thing to do? It's rarely dramatic. Most often, it's a small act of care. To listen fully, to help quietly, to choose kindness when we could turn away. These are not answers to admire. They are truths to live. The king learned not by being told, but by doing, by digging the earth, by bandaging a wound, by staying awake through the night. In that service, he saw clearly life does not always come with clarity, but presence brings perspective. And when we are truly present, we often know what matters most. At some point today, pause and look at the person nearest to you, whether friend, family, or stranger. For just 1 minute, offer them your full attention. Let go of your phone, your task, your thoughts. Be fully there. Ask yourself, Can I treat this moment as the most important? Can I let this person be the center of my kindness? Even if silently, let care guide your presence. Story 3. The Tree and the Storm. In a quiet village, nestled at the base of misty mountains, there stood an ancient tree at the edge of the rice fields. It had been there longer than anyone could remember. Its roots reached deep into the earth, its trunk wide and weathered, its branches arching outward like arms that had embraced centuries. Villagers would often gather beneath its shade during harvest season or rest against its base in the late afternoon light. They spoke of the tree with reverence, calling it the oldest listener, for it seemed to know everything and judge nothing. One summer, news of an incoming storm spread across the valley. The skies darkened early, the birds fled the canopy, and the wind began to howl through the narrow paths like a warning. Many villagers began cutting down trees near their homes, especially the younger ones with fragile trunks, fearing they would fall and damage their roofs. When someone suggested cutting the great tree as well, the elders shook their heads. "Let it stand," one said. "It has outlived storms fiercer than this." When the storm arrived, it was unlike any they had seen. Wind screamed through the fields, thunder shook the mountains, and rain pounded the land for hours. The villagers hid inside, clutching prayer beads in each other's hands. When the morning light returned, soft and pale, they stepped outside to find broken branches, scattered leaves, and collapsed trees. But the great tree was still standing. Though its leaves were thinned and its bark marked by the storm, it stood firm because it had bent with the wind. It had swayed and yielded, but never snapped. That morning the village monk came and placed his palm against the trunk. "You survived not by fighting the wind," he whispered, "but by becoming its friend." Over time, this became a lesson passed down to the children. They were taught not to resist every difficulty, but to remain rooted and let the storm pass through. And as seasons turned and more storms came, the tree remained, not untouched but unbroken, a symbol of quiet resilience that came not from hardness, but from the grace of movement. We are often taught that strength means standing firm, never bending, never breaking. But the old tree teaches a different truth. That resilience is not resistance, it is flexibility. Life brings storms in many forms. Arguments, loss, unexpected changes, pain that rushes in without warning. In those moments, our instinct is often to tighten, to brace, to fight what is happening. Yet the more we fight the wind, the more it wears us down. But when we soften, when we take a breath, loosen our shoulders, and allow what is, we remain whole. To be like the tree is not to be passive, it is to be wise. The tree does not collapse or run. It stays present and lets the wind pass through. It trusts the roots, trusts the earth beneath. And when the storm ends, it is still standing, not because it never moved, but because it knew how to move without breaking. In our own lives, we can learn to do the same. We don't need to fear the wind. We only need to stop resisting it. The next time you feel overwhelmed by anger, stress, or uncertainty, pause for just a moment. Sit or stand quietly. Inhale slowly and say silently, Let it pass through me. Exhale, and imagine yourself swaying gently like the tree, but with strong roots beneath you. With each breath, allow space for the emotion to exist without controlling you. Let the wind come and go. And remember, you don't need to fight to remain standing. Story 4. The Watch and Precious Time. There once lived a boy in a peaceful village surrounded by golden fields and slow-moving rivers. He was raised by his grandfather, a quiet man with silver hair and deep-set eyes, who moved through life with calm intention. The grandfather was not a man of many words, but his presence spoke volumes. He woke early, tended the garden, boiled water for tea, and sat in silence watching the sun rise without ever seeming to hurry. On the boy's 12th birthday, the grandfather handed him a small wooden box. Inside was an old silver pocket watch. Its casing was scratched, its glass slightly fogged, but it ticked steadily in his hand. The boy turned it over with a puzzled look. "It's slow," he said. The grandfather smiled and replied, "No, it's honest." The boy kept the watch, but like most children, he grew older and distracted. As the years passed and his world expanded, the village was left behind. He entered the city where time moved differently, not by sunlight and shadows, but by blinking lights, calendar alerts, and screens. He wore a digital watch now, one that synced to his phone, that reminded him of everything he needed to do, but never asked how he felt doing it. His life became busy, efficient, structured to the minute. Yet underneath it all, something was unraveling. There were days he didn't remember walking to work, conversations he didn't hear, meals eaten while staring at a glowing screen. He was moving quickly but missing everything. One day, many years later, he received a letter. His grandfather had passed away. He returned to the village after more than a decade and found it both unchanged and unfamiliar. In the old house, dusty with memory, he found the silver pocket watch still ticking. He sat on the porch where his grandfather used to sit and listened to the steady rhythm. There was no alarm, no updates, no urgency, only time itself, present, honest, unhurried. For the first time in years, he did nothing. He watched the clouds drift and let the watch mark each second with quiet dignity. Something inside him began to slow. He stayed in the village for weeks, walking the old paths, sitting beneath the same tree, watching the sun fall across the rice fields. When he returned to the city, he left his digital watch behind. He carried the silver one in his pocket, not to track time, but to remember it. From then on, whenever the world grew too loud, he would place his fingers on the cool metal and feel its gentle tick, and it brought him back to the present. He began to notice again the sound of rain on the window, the moment before someone laughs, the weight of his own breath. He still had meetings, deadlines, responsibilities, but he moved through them differently, not frantically, but deliberately. The pocket watch never told him what to do. It reminded him how to be. And in that being, he found space. And in that space, he rediscovered life. We often think time is something we chase, as if we're always late, always lacking, always trying to catch up. But the truth is, time is not running away from us. we are running away from it. We fill our days with busyness, with notifications, with lists and urgency, until the moments blur and the meaning slips away. The old watch teaches a quiet lesson. Time doesn't need to move faster. It needs to be felt more deeply. The tick of the second hand is not a warning, it is a whisper, inviting us to return. Not to yesterday, not to tomorrow, but to now, to this breath, this sound, this pause. Presence does not come from slowing everything down outside us. It comes from choosing to arrive inside each moment with our full attention. The boy, now grown, did not abandon his life. He changed his relationship with time. He stopped measuring worth by how much he could fit into a day and began measuring meaning by how fully he could meet it. And in that shift, he reclaimed something that no clock could ever give him: the sacredness of now. Today, take 5 minutes to sit without a phone, a task, or a goal. Choose a quiet corner, hold an object in your hand, or a cup, a stone, or just your breath. Listen to the sound of passing time. Let each second be enough. If thoughts come, let them pass like clouds. For those 5 minutes, do not chase time. Let it come to you, gently, honestly, and without rush. Story 5. Zen Master Pouring Tea. There was once a young scholar who had studied deeply and widely. He had read ancient texts, memorized sacred teachings, debated with the most esteemed philosophers, and filled journals with his insights. And yet, something in him remained unsatisfied. The more he learned, the more restless he became, as if each answer only led to more questions. Hearing of a Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man said to speak rarely but with great clarity, the scholar set out on a long journey to find him. After many days of travel, he arrived at a quiet temple surrounded by pine trees and silence. The master greeted him with a gentle bow and led him to a small wooden room where they sat together. The scholar began at once, eager to prove his learning. He spoke of scriptures, of sutras, of metaphysical systems and psychological theories. He listed what he had read, what he had concluded, and the insights he believed he had achieved. The master remained silent, his eyes soft, his hands folded in his lap. After some time, the master rose and began to prepare tea. The scholar kept talking, his words flowing faster as if trying to fill the silence between them. The master returned with a teapot and 2 cups. He poured into the scholar's cup. The warm liquid rose steadily, reaching the rim, and then continued, overflowing onto the table. The scholar stopped mid-sentence. "Master," he said, startled, "the cup is full. No more will go in." The master set the teapot down and looked at him. "Like this cup," he said gently, "you are full of your own knowledge and opinions. Before I can show you anything, you must first empty your cup." The room was quiet. The scholar looked down at the cup, then at his hands, then finally into the eyes of the master. Something within him softened. For the first time in a long while, he stopped speaking. He bowed his head. In the days that followed, he remained at the temple. He swept leaves, cooked simple meals, meditated at sunrise. The silence that once made him anxious began to feel like home. He noticed the sound of water boiling, the warmth of a bowl in his hands, the hush of wind through bamboo. He no longer sought answers, he simply listened. He began to understand that wisdom is not something we collect. It's something we become quiet enough to hear. And with each breath, he emptied a little more of what he thought he knew. And in that empty space, something deeper began to pour in. We often mistake learning for understanding. We chase after information, collect quotes, consume teachings, and build towers of thought, only to find ourselves no closer to peace. But the mind, like the cup, has limits. When it is already full, even the most beautiful truths will spill over, unused. Emptiness is not a lack, it is readiness. When we empty the cup of assumptions, of defensiveness, of the need to impress, we become open to direct experience. We begin to feel the warmth in a moment, the stillness in a breath, the wisdom in a silence. The scholar believed his knowledge would open the door, but it was humility that did. In our own lives, we are often too quick to fill, to speak, to correct. But sometimes the deepest shift comes when we stop, when we sit with the not knowing, when we create space, not just in our schedules, but in our hearts. The Zen master did not pour the tea by accident. He offered a teaching without words, one that must be experienced to be understood. When we carry our full cup into every moment, we miss the moment. But when we pause and empty, even just a little, we begin to receive again. Life will pour itself into us if we let it. Today, take one conversation with a friend, a colleague, or even a stranger, and approach it with an empty cup. Before responding, pause. Listen not only to the words, but to the space between them. Let go of the need to advise, fix, or impress. Just be present. Notice how it feels to make room, and allow the moment to fill you in ways you didn't expect. Story 6. The Father and the Three Gifts. There once lived a father and son in a quiet village, surrounded by hills and tall grasses that whispered in the wind. The mother had passed when the boy was still small, and the father had raised his son with quiet devotion. They lived modestly, sharing simple meals, tending a small garden, and walking together at dusk when the sky turned golden. The father was not a man of many words, but everything he did was thoughtful. As the boy grew older, he became curious about the world beyond the village, the cities, the riches, the adventures he had only heard of in stories. On the morning of his 18th birthday, the father handed his son a worn cloth bag containing 3 small packages. "These are your gifts," he said. "Do not open them all at once. Open each one only when life tells you it's time." The son embraced his father, thanked him, and set off to begin his journey. At first, the world felt vast and full of possibility. He worked hard, made new friends, encountered challenges and victories. One day, after being cheated in a business deal and nearly losing everything he had saved, he sat alone by a riverside, angry and uncertain. He remembered the first gift and opened it. Inside was a small stone etched with the words, "Pause before you act." He held it in his palm, let its weight settle his breath, and realized how many mistakes he had made by reacting too quickly. From then on, he carried the stone and took a breath before speaking, deciding, or judging. Years passed. The boy became a man. He built a life, fell in love, experienced heartbreak, found success, tasted loss. After the end of a painful relationship that had consumed his heart, he wandered the streets of a foreign city in the rain, feeling emptier than ever before. That night he remembered the second package. Inside was a white feather and a note, "Let go with grace." He wept. He had been holding on so tightly, to blame, to regret, to the illusion of control. That night he wrote a letter he never sent, then burned it by candlelight, watching the smoke rise like forgiveness. Slowly his heart began to breathe again. More years passed. He became a father himself. He raised his children with tenderness, taught them how to notice the stars and how to listen with their whole bodies. On his 50th birthday, he sat alone in his garden, watching the shadows grow long, and knew it was time for the third gift. Inside was a small, clear mirror. There was no note. He looked into it and saw not just his face, but his journey. The young man he once was, the mistakes, the kindness, the aging eyes that still held curiosity. He smiled, understanding that the mirror was not meant to teach, but to remind. Everything he had searched for, wisdom, clarity, peace, had always been within him. The gifts had not given him anything new. They had only helped him return to what he already carried inside. We often seek guidance from the outside, from books, from mentors, from signs and symbols, hoping they will give us the answers we crave. But the deepest wisdom comes when we are ready to receive it. The Father did not try to explain life. He offered tools that would bloom only when the heart was ripe. The stone taught the power of pausing, how one breath can save a day, how restraint can lead to clarity. The feather whispered of surrender, how letting go is not weakness, but wisdom. And the mirror, the final gift, reminded him that the journey is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who we already are. We forget that we carry wisdom in our bones, that life itself is always teaching us, gently, persistently, but we must be willing to listen, not with urgency, but with presence. Not by chasing the truth, but by stopping long enough to see that it has been walking beside us all along. The man did not become wise because of the gifts. He became wise because he listened to when it was time to open them. Today, carry an object with you. A small stone, a leaf, a coin, and let it be your reminder to pause. When faced with a moment of emotion, choice, or doubt, touch the object and take a slow breath. Ask yourself, what am I holding that I might release? What truth do I already know? Then act from stillness, not reaction. Story 7. The Fisherman and the River. There was once a fisherman who lived in a quiet village by a wee slow-moving river. Every morning before the sun rose, he would push his wooden boat into the misty water and cast his net. He had done this for years, knowing every bend of the river, every shift in current. He was known for his skill, but also for his restlessness. Though his catches were often enough to feed himself and trade at the market, he was never fully content. He had heard rumors of a place far upstream where the water was clearer, the fish more abundant, and the life richer. Elders in the village had warned him that the path upriver was dangerous and full of unknowns, but the fisherman was driven by a quiet ache, the feeling that something essential was missing. One morning, without telling anyone, he packed a small bag, tightened his net, and set off upstream. He rowed for days, then weeks, stopping only when the river allowed. He encountered other fishermen along the way, some kind, some cruel, all chasing the same dream. A better place, a better catch, a better life. But none of them had found it. Still, he pressed on, determined that if he just kept going, he would reach it. As the journey wore on, the water narrowed, rocks grew sharper, storms came faster. His hands blistered, his back ached, and doubt began to whisper. One night, as he camped beside a small fire near a fork in the river, he fell into uneasy sleep. In his dream, he stood beside an old man who looked familiar. The man pointed to the river and said, "What you seek is not further up the stream. It is within the current you already knew." The fisherman awoke with tears in his eyes, unsure why. The next morning, instead of going farther, he turned his boat around. He rowed for days, following the bends he once rushed past, noticing for the first time the bird song, the shifting light on water, the kindness of strangers he had once ignored. When he finally returned to his village, it felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He went back to fishing, but now each cast of his net felt like a conversation with the river. He no longer strained to reach something else. He had found what he was looking for by returning to where he started, with new eyes. Sometimes in life we chase something we cannot name, a better version of ourselves, a life more meaningful, a future more fulfilled. We think that what we seek lies somewhere distant, just beyond the next effort, the next milestone, the next horizon. But often what we long for is not ahead of us. It is beneath us, around us, within us. The river, like life, carries its wisdom in flow. We move so fast trying to escape the present, to outrow discomfort or dissatisfaction, forgetting that stillness does not mean stagnation. The fisherman left because he thought fulfillment was elsewhere. He returned because he realized fulfillment was a matter of perception, not location. The journey outward showed him the value of what he already had. In our own lives, we are tempted to chase endlessly, more achievement, more clarity, more control. But peace is rarely found in reaching. It is found in seeing what is already here with the depth and presence we used to overlook. The river doesn't change for us, but when we change how we meet it, everything transforms. We must learn to be in the current, not race ahead of it. The answers we seek are often not hidden. They are simply quiet, waiting for us to stop long enough to listen. Today, wherever you are, at work, at home, in transit, pause for just 1 minute. Sit, stand, or lie still and observe what is around you. the air, the sound, the feeling in your body. Ask yourself, what part of me is rushing forward? Then take a slow breath and whisper internally, I am already here. Let that presence guide you not to a distant goal, but into the depth of this very moment. Story 8. The Beggar and the Diamond. There was once a wandering beggar who traveled from village to village with nothing but a worn blanket, a wooden bowl, and a staff carved with time. His clothes were torn, his feet calloused, his hair long and gray. He lived on the kindness of strangers, asking for food not with desperation, but with humility. One afternoon, as he sat beneath a tree on the outskirts of a small village, a monk passed by and noticed the beggar resting. The monk carried a small satchel and wore a gentle smile. He sat beside the beggar and they shared a quiet meal, a handful of rice, a piece of fruit. Some water passed between them. As they parted, the monk reached into his satchel and, without a word, placed a small pouch into the beggar's hands before walking on. The beggar opened it and gasped. Inside was a brilliant diamond, clear and dazzling, worth more than anything he had seen in his life. With trembling fingers, he stared at it under the fading light, unsure what to do. That night, he couldn't sleep. He imagined all the things it could buy: food, clothes, a home, perhaps even servants. But alongside excitement came fear. Fear of losing it, of being robbed, of not knowing its true value. The next day, as the sun rose, the beggar stood and walked toward the direction the monk had gone. He found him sitting by a stream, washing his hands in silence. The beggar bowed deeply and returned the diamond. The monk looked up, puzzled. "You do not want it?" he asked. The beggar replied, "No. I want something far more valuable. I want to know what you know, the kind of peace that allows you to give away something so precious without hesitation." The monk smiled. He motioned for the beggar to sit, and together they watched the stream ripple with morning light. From that day on, the beggar no longer sought coins or meals. He followed the monk not to receive, but to unlearn. Over time, he discovered something deeper than comfort: the quiet joy of needing little, the strength of being free from fear, and the realization that the greatest wealth was the ability to give without attachment. He never forgot the diamond, not because he lost it, but because in returning it, he had found himself in a world that often equates value with possession. We are taught to seek more wealth, more security, more guarantees. We fear not having enough, so we hold tightly to what we believe gives us safety. But true peace does not come from owning. It comes from releasing. The monk's ability to give the diamond away without attachment was not carelessness, it was clarity. He was not defined by what he held, but by what he could let go of. The beggar believed he wanted riches. What he truly wanted was freedom, the kind of freedom that comes when we are no longer owned by what we own. Many of us carry diamonds, not in our hands, but in our fears. We clutch ideas of who we should be, of what we must achieve, of what we cannot lose. And in doing so, we grow anxious, protective, reactive. But there is a deeper abundance that cannot be stolen, cannot be broken, cannot fade. It lives in our capacity to give, to release, to trust. The beggar's transformation began not with the diamond, but with the question, what kind of person gives something so precious without regret? In that question, he began to awaken. In our own lives, we might ask something similar. What is it we're holding that holds us in return? What if true richness is measured not by what we keep, but by what we can offer and still remain whole? Today, notice one thing you are clinging to. A possession, a worry, a belief. Hold it in your awareness and ask yourself, what would it feel like to release this even for a moment? Practice letting go in a small way. Give something, forgive something, pause your grip, and observe the quiet space that opens within. Story 9. The Merchant and the Bag of Gold. There was once a merchant who traveled from city to city, his caravan filled with spices, silk, and stories. He was clever, charming, and well-liked by his peers. But what set him apart was his relentless ambition. Every coin he earned was reinvested, every deal he made led to a bigger one. Though he lived in comfort, he always felt a slight ache, as if he were running toward something he couldn't quite name. One evening, while passing through a desert village, he heard a tale of an abandoned monastery deep in the dunes, where a forgotten treasure lay hidden beneath stone and sand. Oh, a heavy bag of gold, untouched for decades. The story captured his imagination. That night, he changed his route, hired a guide, and set off to find it. After days of harsh sun, wind, and thirst, they reached the ruins. Beneath a crumbling altar, just as the story had said, they found a cloth bag filled with gold coins, thick and gleaming. The merchant's eyes widened. He dismissed his guide and sat alone with the treasure, imagining the expansions he could make, the ships he could buy, the future he would finally secure. As the desert night fell, cold and quiet, he tucked the bag under his arm and set off back toward the city. But the return journey was harder than expected. The gold weighed more than he realized. His pace slowed, his shoulders ached, and the sand seemed to stretch endlessly. Thirst gnawed at him, but he refused to put the bag down. He feared losing it. Days passed. Blisters opened on his feet. The bag pressed deep red marks into his skin. At one point, dizzy from heat and hunger, he collapsed beside a dying tree and whispered, "I just wanted to be free." A nomad found him there, barely conscious. He nursed him back to life with water and dates. When the merchant finally opened his eyes, the first thing he asked was, "Where's the gold?" The nomad said, "I left it behind. It was going to kill you." The merchant sat in silence for a long time. Eventually he bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. He returned home with nothing but the clothes on his back and a lesson burned into his bones. From that day forward, he traded differently. No longer chasing endlessly, he began to ask, at what cost? He discovered that freedom was not found in having more, but in needing less. And in releasing the weight he once thought he needed to carry, he began to walk lighter, speak softer, and sleep more deeply than he ever had before. Greed is not always loud. It does not always shout through excess or vanity. Sometimes it whispers in the back of our minds, just a little more, just a little longer, just one more step until we feel safe. But the truth is, when we carry too much, we stop moving. When we grip too tightly, we lose our ability to breathe. The merchant believed the gold would set him free, but it nearly destroyed him, not because gold is evil, but because he forgot to ask what it would cost. In our lives, we often chase things, success, admiration, control, without questioning whether they nourish or deplete us. We carry burdens that were never meant to be ours, thinking they will lead us to worth. But the heaviest weights are rarely physical. They are silent expectations, hidden fears, unresolved longings. Letting go is not failure. It is discernment. When we stop and ask, what am I carrying and is it worth the cost? We begin to live differently. We begin to value lightness over accumulation, peace over possession, clarity over conquest. The desert did not steal the merchant's ambition. It purified it. And in doing so, it gave him back something he didn't even know he had lost: himself. Today, write down one thing you feel driven to chase: more money, approval, control, or perfection. Then ask, why do I want this? What is it costing me? For one moment, set that pursuit down. Breathe without it. Feel the space it leaves behind. Even if you pick it back up, let today be a reminder that you can choose what you carry. Story 10. The Blind Men and the Elephant. In a quiet kingdom far from noise and war, there lived 6 blind men who spent their lives in study and conversation. Though they could not see the world with their eyes, they were wise in their own ways and known for their thoughtful debates. One day, news reached them that a great elephant, a creature none of them had ever encountered, was being brought through their village. Curious and eager to understand, they asked to be led to it so they might finally know what an elephant truly was. The attendants agreed and guided each man to a different part of the animal. The first man touched the elephant's broad side and declared, "An elephant is like a wall, flat and firm and immense." The second, who held the trunk, shook his head. "No, it's like a thick snake, twisting and alive." The third grasped the tusk and argued, "You are both wrong. It is clearly like a spear, sharp and smooth and dangerous." The fourth touched a leg and replied, "You are all mistaken. The elephant is like a tree, rooted and solid." The fifth, who held the ear, insisted, "It is like a fan, wide and thin and fluttering." And the sixth, who clutched the tail, laughed, "You're fools. It is obviously like a rope, long and frayed at the end." They returned to the village square and began to debate, each convinced of his own version of the truth. Voices rose, words sharpened. They argued until others gathered to watch. A child in the crowd tugged at the robe of an elder and whispered, "Why are they fighting? Aren't they all touching the same elephant?" The elder knelt beside her and smiled gently. "Yes," he said, "but each of them only touched a part. They are arguing not because they are wrong, but because they are not listening to each other." The elder then approached the blind men and said, "You are each right, and yet not one of you is complete. The truth is larger than any one of your experiences. If you stop trying to win and instead share what you felt, you might begin to see the whole. Silence fell. One by one, the blind men lowered their heads, and together they began to speak, not to argue, but to understand. So often in life, we mistake our experiences for the whole truth. We believe what we see, feel, and know must be all there is. And when others present something different, we assume they are wrong. But the truth, like the elephant, is vast. No single perspective contains it entirely. Each of us holds a part, shaped by our history, our emotions, our limitations. But it is only through listening to others with humility that we begin to glimpse the bigger picture. The blind men were not foolish because they were wrong. They were foolish because they refused to consider what they hadn't touched. How many times in our lives do we cling to one version of reality, a judgment, a belief, a story, and use it to shut others out? The world grows more divided when we prioritize being right over being curious. But the moment we pause and ask, what might I not be seeing? We step toward wisdom. The elders' words still echo today. Understanding does not come from speaking louder. It comes from listening deeper. When we share our truths and hold space for the truths of others, something larger emerges. Not just knowledge, but connection. And in that connection, we find clarity far greater than anything we could grasp alone. Today, notice a disagreement with someone else or within yourself. Instead of reacting, pause and ask, what part of the elephant am I holding? Then ask, what part might they be holding? Practice listening, not to agree or refute, but to expand. Let every perspective become a window into something wider than yourself. You have now journeyed through 10 gentle stories, each carrying its own quiet seed of wisdom. A handful of salt, reminding you that your heart can be as vast as a lake. A king's search for meaning, guiding you back to the only time that matters. Now. A tree surviving the storm by bending instead of breaking. A watch that ticks not to hurry you but to return you to presence. A teacup that overflows until we learn to empty ourselves of what we think we know. A father's gifts that unfold when life is ready to teach. A fisherman who searches far only to find that what he needed was always near. A beggar who returns a diamond and finds freedom instead of wealth. A merchant who learns that letting go of the gold is the beginning of lightness. And 6 blind men who remind us that no one sees the whole, and that understanding begins where certainty ends. These stories are not rules, they are invitations. Invitations to soften, to slow, to open. They do not ask you to fix yourself. They ask you to return to yourself, to notice your breath, to loosen the grip, to be where your feet are. As you prepare to drift into sleep, let these stories settle in your body like warm tea. Let the truths you felt, even if only as whispers, stay with you gently. There is no need to remember everything. The parts that matter will stay. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are already here. Let your mind rest now. Let your body sink into stillness. Let the stories carry you into the quiet space where peace lives not in answers, but in presence. The river flows, the tree stands, the cup waits, and you are enough just as you are in this very breath. Thank you for listening. May sleep come gently. May peace find you in the spaces between thoughts. And may you wake tomorrow with a little more softness in your eyes, a little more stillness in your heart. If this journey brought you peace, please consider following, sharing, or leaving a kind note. Even a small gesture helps this space reach someone who needs it. Until then, be well, be present, be home.